Mitchell Robinson might be back for the Knicks early next month, according to a new report by Ian Begley. If that's the case, what's he going to bring to the Knicks? Will he fit with Karl-Anthony Towns, or is his time on the Knicks already limited? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome into Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And he's Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, and a co-host of the Saturday Locked On NBA podcast. And I wanted to thank you all for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that notification bell on YouTube or the auto download function on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, if you want to check out some more Locked On Knicks content after this show, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. Introducing the Locked On Knicks Daily Newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Knicks newsletter. Gavin, today we've got a lot to talk about in terms of Mitchell Robinson returning. Ian Begley says that the Knicks have a solid belief, quote, that Mitchell Robinson will return to the court around early February. That is all of about 2 weeks away at this point, if we want to get as literal as humanly possible. So it seems like we're getting closer and closer to a Mitchell Robinson return. On today's show, we'll talk about where Mitch was at the last time we saw him, what his fit with Karl-Anthony Towns could be like, and predictions on how this is all going to play out. So will he even play for the Knicks? Will he get traded? Will he perform well? Will he not perform well? What will the rotations look like? Will he start potentially? All kinds of stuff to get into. But Gavin, first, let's take a look into the past. Where was Mitch the last time that we saw him? It feels like forever ago, but he was in the Knicks playoff series last year before Joel Embiid intentionally injured him by grabbing his leg while he was going up for a dunk. I will never let that one die. And, it's not something I'm particularly happy about to this day. But Mitch is almost back from that injury inflicted by Joel Embiid and about ready to hit the court again. But where was he at this time last year and even beforehand?
I want to look even more so at the first 20 games or so, because I think that was probably the closest version to Mitch that we're going to get. I think it's also worth noting the guy's still just 26 years old. And I think I sometimes forget that, like, at least on paper, should be pretty close to his athletic prime soon, just because we saw some indicators that we'll get into that he had fallen off that a little bit. But anyways, I think the biggest indicator of that was his field goal percentage, which early in his career, and it's easy to forget just what an outlier was in that his strengths were, if not in the most important areas, Alex, as strong as any player in the NBA, in that he was a historical offensive rebounder, a historical finisher, and at times, especially his rookie year, like a borderline historical shot blocker, while basically being able to do nothing else on a basketball court. And then last season, we saw him a little more well-rounded in some ways, but also with some defined weaknesses that weren't there in the past. The biggest thing to note, I think, is his drop-off at the rim, where, if you remember, I think what was his second season in the NBA, he set an NBA record shooting 74% at the rim, all the way down to 57% last season. And I am deeply fascinated to see, because that was kind of an ongoing trend for him, whether that was a product of just last season, maybe again, as we saw earlier in his career, coming in at the wrong weight, or if he was dealing with some other injury last season. And I'm curious if the Knicks, being just extremely, extremely conservative in his rehab, if he got some of that back. It's worth noting it might have just been a strength trade-off where he was bulkier and, for whatever reason, maybe like a little less coordinated, a little less athletic around the basket. Because on the flip side, he was essentially the best offensive rebounder in basketball last season. with a 17.6% offensive rebound percentage. That was 99th percentile in the NBA. He was second in the NBA pre-All-Star break in contested offensive rebound percentage. Basically, any offensive rebound he was battling for, he won over 3/4 of them. He was just behind Anthony Davis in that category. I still think it is interesting to see if with slightly better spacing, which you will have now when you replace RJ Barrett and Julius Randle with presumably Karl-Anthony Towns and OG Anunoby, assuming he gets time with that starting lineup, or maybe even gets to go 4 out with the bench unit, whether that rim percentage can bounce back a little bit, because this is a guy who every single year of his career has been 100th percentile in rim attempts, right? He's not shooting from anywhere else. If he can get a bit more efficient there, it would pretty substantially help the Knicks offense, I think, having a true lob threat that they don't really have right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that so we could save the cat part of it for the next segment, because we're gonna get all into that in terms of stats that Mitch had with Julius Randle, stats the cat had with Rudy Gobert, so on and so forth. But I think if nothing else, I think that just having a guy back that can do sort of like what they've been trying to use Jericho Sims for when he's had to play minutes, but better. I think that it's just inarguable that Mitch is just better at almost everything on the basketball court than Jericho Sims, maybe that other than like Sims had that really nice possession against Maxey the other day where he locked him up on the perimeter. Like maybe you can't get that out of Mitch, but everything else you're going
to used to get that out of Mitch. Maybe not anymore. But.
Yeah, maybe rookie Mitch could have done that, but not current day Mitch, I don't think. Although maybe, I don't know, maybe he'll surprise us. This was the guy that back in the day like D'd up James Harden in the same way and blocked the 3 on him. So I mean, maybe he's still got one of those left in him. But in all likelihood, you probably don't get that, but you get the rebounding is going to be at a new level. The pick and roll, I mean, they've clearly been trying to use Sims in pick and roll and just hit him on a quick hitter and let him get a dunk. And it just, he's stone-handed a lot of them. Mitch has shown a little bit of stone-handiness the last few years too, which I think has contributed to that, the drop in efficiency, is the fact that he's not catching and gathering the ball as quickly as he has. And maybe some of that is just never being able to develop a good rapport with Jalen Brunson or something, like just the fact that they haven't gotten like as much consistent time together as other players have with Brunson since Brunson arrived with the Knicks 2 years ago, just because of Randall's injuries and everything. Though he had a pretty, well, yeah, I'd say a somewhat injury-free version of himself for 55 games in 22 to 23. So, I mean, he's had his shots there, but I think on offense, the main thing will just be, I've referenced this already in a show recently. I think that with how good he is at rebounding, and particularly offensive rebounding, to be able to have a team that shoots better than that 22 to 23 season, where, I mean, he set all those high marks in offensive rebounding. The Knicks as a team set all those high marks in offensive rebounding, mostly because they were a trash shooting team. There's just a lot more opportunities to get it. I wonder if he can keep that same efficiency up, keep that like offensive rebounding percentage at that crazy like 17% number, but the Knicks then morph back into one of the top shooting teams in the NBA, which of course is contingent on OG and Mikal, finding their stuff again. But one, does that just make them the best offense in both facets, where they're, both a great shooting team and the ones they miss are getting offensive rebounded? Or if things continue the way that they have been for OG and Mikal, where they're shooting like low 30s, do they just kind of have the avenue to go back to a similar version to that 22-23 offense where Mitch could potentially start and, be out there and just gathering offensive rebounds all day, and they could still find a way to become a top 3 offense that way, or even a top 1 offense, even if those two guys are shooting like 30%. It'll be interesting to see like just how aggressive Tibbs is in trying to get Mitch integrated and potentially starting right from the get-go.
Yeah, I think even though I referenced him and Cat together, obviously, I think I kind of disagree that he's going to start. And I know you're not saying right away. I personally, I don't know, and this is coming from the person who predicted he would start a playoff game. I don't know if he ever starts, and I think if he does start, it would come at the very tail end of the regular season. and into the playoffs. I think they are going to try this year to make the cat at the 5 thing work. And obviously offensively, it works really well. And they're going to figure out the ceiling of it defensively. Knowing Tom Thibodeau, would he go to Mitch starting in a specific series? Like, especially if they play the Cavs. Yeah, I could see it. And it's because even more so, not even more so. It's because of his defense, obviously. And last season, I would say those first 20 games or so was the best I've ever seen Mitchell Robinson play defense in the NBA, which is surprising in some form and fashion because he certainly does not have the flashy block numbers he did early in his career. As a rookie, he peaked at 5.7% in terms of his block percentage. So basically 6% of the shots opponents took, Mitchell Robinson would get to and block. He set an NBA record tied an NBA record with 8 blocks and a half against the Magic in 2018. And then it essentially has gone down every year of his career since, with the blip in 2021, where it was a low and then it bounced back for 2 years. And then last season, only 2.4%. So dramatically down. The trade-off of that, Alex, was that his foul percentage was far and away the lowest of his career as a rookie. He was one of the most foul-prone bigs in the entire NBA. Last season, he was 85th percentile in being one of the least foul-prone bigs in the entire NBA. Career high in steal percentage. And if we remember where you really don't want to trade Mitchell Robinson, obviously he torched the Cavs 2 years ago. Last season essentially shut down Joel Embiid. I can only find the stats, just quickly researching it from game 1. In game 1, in 19 minutes, he held Embiid to 2 for 11 shooting, 7 points, 0 for 3 from 3. Played 30 minutes because Isaiah Hartenstein had no chance against Joel Embiid, and Mitchell Robinson, again, turned the faucet off on arguably the best offensive center in basketball. And he still has, I think, just incredible value to this Knicks team. And I thought, based on talking to you, we both agreed, he was one of the, I would say, 10 best defensive players in basketball those first 20 games or so. And even if that's only in a 15-minute per game spurt, I think that could totally reshape the Knicks defense, having that option.
Yeah, I think so too. Although ironically, the best matchups that Cat has are against those top centers in the league. Like traditionally, Cat has done really well against Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, like did really well against Jokic for a whole playoff series last year. Like all these guys that are like the big man, torchbearers, Cat seems to always step up against. It's like the random games against, like, I don't know, Washington or whatever, sometimes where Cat just seems to be against like a lot of dribble drive penetration and stuff where he struggles the most. So I actually think even more so than being able to, I mean, it would be nice to have like 48 minutes of great defense against like Joel Embiid, for example, which, maybe that's a playoff series the Knicks are destined for again, if the Sixers continue turning things around here and eventually settle in at like a 7 or 6 seed or whatever. But, I think that the biggest thing with Mitch is that you then get that ability to start funneling faster, guard type players trying to get to the rim or whatever. You get to start funneling them into the paint again, and just having the Mitchell Robinson, stock monster there to deal with them again, or at the very least, a guy that's just phenomenal at getting vertical and stopping someone when they come in on defense. But we've been talking a lot about Cat, so we may as well just get into it. How is Cat going to fit with Mitchell Robinson? I think this is the number one question for potentially seeing how Mitch's return could go. It's the newest, arguably best player on the Knicks this year, depending on how you feel about him versus Brunson, but they've both been phenomenal. Cat is playing at a near MVP level, but he's been doing it all at center. But he's also had a large sample size playing with a center pretty similar to Mitch and Rudy Gobert. So we're going to get into the numbers, see how that fit works, all that in just a second on Locked On Knicks.
But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you get 4% APY on your cash in non-retirement accounts. It's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of a high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% on annual IRA contributions, sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 a month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. So this is the big question about Karl-Anthony or about Mitchell Robinson. Can you actually play him with Karl-Anthony Towns? Because if you can, he is at most a 15-minute per game player. Alex, I think we saw enough evidence the last 2 years with Rudy Gobert and Cat last season, where Minnesota was historically good defensively, far and away the best defense in the NBA, that it works pretty well. That template at least works pretty well, right? Cat and a rim protector. I was thinking, even when you were talking about Nikola Jokic, obviously a lot of that was Cat and his physicality and his ability to just take bigger bodies into his chest and wall up and hold up. I do think a big part of his success against someone like Nikola Jokic was having a Rudy Gobert behind him, right? To threaten as kind of a secondary shot protector, sort of the template for how the Los Angeles Lakers had guarded Jokic in the past. And of course, the Knicks don't need to worry about Jokic. They do need to worry about Joel Embiid. They do need to worry about the combination of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. You play a team like the Magic, who don't have a post-up big, but are just big across the board and very physical. It's exciting to have the option of going super big and having the extra rim protection in there. Personally, I think they can make it work. I do think there'll be some drop-off offensively, but you did the deep dive. What did the numbers say about how Cat performed with Rudy Gobert and how it'll eventually look with Mitchell Robinson?
Yeah, so I wanted to just check out the lineup data, so I just pulled basic two-man lineup data. This is all this is available on nba.com/stats if anyone ever wants to look this up for themselves. Like, they have a pretty robust stat portfolio there. So Cat and Gobert played 2 years together. First year, only 27 games, and obviously it was well reported how rough that went, and yet still their first year were slightly in the positive together, plus 0.6 points per 100 possessions together out there. Their net rating was plus 0.6 points better in just 27 games. But last year, the pairing really kind of took off. 60 games, they were plus 8.6 points better per 100 possessions. That's like pretty elite level. I mean, that's like what you see out of, some of the best combos that play a lot of minutes together. There's sort of diminishing returns because it's a whole season. So, you'll have some guys that only play a handful of minutes together and you can point to and be like, well, they're like 20 points per 100 possessions better. Why don't they play more? There's no way to know. Certainly the Knicks fans know all about that with guys like Emmanuel Quickley and Deuce McBride in their early years, where the lineup data would say amazing things. But considering the amount that Cat and Gobert played together, that is really elite, plus 8.6 points better. But if you look at Mitch and Julius Randle, you can find some sort of similar trends. 20 to 21, Mitch obviously had some injury issues that year, 2 of the years really with Randle. You can almost throw out, I don't want to say they were like, you can't check on them at all, but it was just hard to say because it's less than half a season of data. But plus 0.2 points per 100 together in 20 to 21, first year under Tibbs. 21 to 22, they're minus 3.6 points 100 per 100 in 67 games. But I think we can all agree to just block that year out of our minds.
I also think it's worth noting they had, maybe a little better in 21-22, but functionally like just no shooting around those two when they both want it to be at the rim. And obviously that won't be the case this year with the Knicks.
Exactly. Yeah. And then 22 to 23, Jalen Brunson arrives. And in 55 games, Mitch and Randle are plus 7.9 points up per 100 possessions better together. So, that's similar to that Cat and Gobert number where that's like bordering on elite. Like they were really, really good when they were on the floor together. And then last year, plus 2.5 points per 100 better together in 21 games, obviously all in the early season, thanks to Mitch's injury woes. But then, I'm going to talk about box outs and then just Cat's efficiency. But first off, how do you envision, when I look at this, I think, if Mitch could be that good with Randle, who was, he was volume shooting in 22 to 23, like he shot the ball more than he ever has, but didn't do it particularly efficiently. I think that kind of says something about how this could potentially work if Mitch has the thing that is most intriguing to me is if Mitch can have a true 4-out offense around him with just him in the middle trying to get those offensive rebounds. Obviously you have to get something going with like a Mitch screen to start that off, But if you could have Cat above the break waiting for a potential three, drawing another big out there, if you could have Mikal and OG in the corners, and then Brunson and Mitch, or, take your pick, you could put Harden for one of the two wings there. I think that's a pretty intriguing lineup to have out there and be able to space the floor for Mitch in a way that he's never had before. Because I think that a lot of teams just straight up didn't take Julius Randle seriously unless he would make like 3 threes in the first quarter. Then they would start actually guarding him out to the 3-point line. But for the most part, like, it was always on him to get hot and then force the other team to adjust. Whereas Cat is a good enough 3-point shooter that teams just adjust to him on the perimeter immediately. And if they don't, they get burned because he's just like a bona fide 40% every single game type shooter for the most part. Less so than like some of the other guys on the Knicks that are a little more streaky. So I think that's the main thing to me that stands out, like just how good Cat and Gobert were last year and how that could potentially translate to the Knicks with Mitch and Cat.
Yeah, and I think maybe when Mitch actually returns, this is a good note to set a calendar reminder. We'll get Ben Beacon on of Locked On Wolves and talk more about the actual, just, I would say, geometric mechanics of how it worked with Cat and Gobert on the floor, because I'm really curious to hear about that. And as we mentioned on that show, when we did the crossover with Locked On Wolves, they were really competitive against a team like the Boston Celtics, even though Gobert is similar to Mitch. He's a bit better, but not known for his ability to defend in space. But to get at your question, I think Mitch will benefit undoubtedly. What you are worried about is Cat, your MVP candidate. Is he even close to the same offensive player? Like, Minnesota did not run very many pick and roll. I think it was somehow less than, if I'm remembering the number correctly, it was somehow less than 10 total on the season. They barely ran pick and roll between Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns, because there's no point when Rudy Gobert is sitting at the rim, and there's no point when Mitchell Robinson is sitting at the rim. So you're losing arguably the NBA's best pick and roll when you're out there. You're probably really risking Cat's drive and pump game, because instead of him blowing by a big, getting downhill and dunking it, he's blowing by a big, getting downhill. And is he taking a runner? Or is he taking a short pull-up? Because Mitch's man is going to be right there. And you can hope that the Knicks have figured some stuff out with Mitchell Robinson, similar to Isaiah Hartenstein, where maybe he is screening for Mikal Bridges on the other side of the floor and his big is preoccupied. But generally, that big, if Mitchell Robinson is on the floor, even if you move Mitch away from the basket, he's going to be hovering around that dunker spot, ready to duck into the lane, ready to contest Cat. And Cat's life is going to be that much harder. And this guy, who we said it 2 shows ago, has been the single most efficient high-level scorer in the NBA this year. Like, you are just not getting that anymore. And Cat, I'll let you get into it now, is such a good offensive player that he can overcome that to some extent, still put up good numbers, still put up relatively good efficiency. You are just losing that monster efficiency that has defined his game. And the one other argument that I assume Minnesota took advantage of too is, even if Cat is shooting a little less efficiently, you do have the best offensive rebounder in the NBA to clean that up and give you second opportunities. And then your defense inevitably is going to be a whole lot better. So it's a fascinating trade-off. I think at the start, though, we probably see Mitch playing more with Mikal Bridges, with OG Anunoby, maybe Deuce McBride and Campaign, and bench units that do have 4-out spacing. And I think that really benefits him a lot.
Yeah, so I'll just throw a couple last numbers out there, and then we could start talking about the nuts and bolts, the rotation and everything else in the next segment, and how we think this whole thing is going to go. But just a couple other numbers I thought were interesting. Box outs by season. Mitch and Gobert, very similar. 22 to 23. Mitch had 3.1 box outs per game, which was first in the NBA. Gobert had 1.9, which was 10th, and tie for 10th in the NBA. But then last year, Mitch was at 2.9, which was third in the NBA. And then Gobert was at 2.8, which was fourth in the NBA. So, like, very similar in box outs, in terms of the impact that they give there. I think that's going to help Cat out a lot. I think that if they're playing together, that means that Cat's job gets easier, much in the similar way that we saw that Julius Randle would just eat up defensive rebounds, and same with Josh Hart, even with offensive rebounds, because Mitch is just always the biggest body on the court and always putting a body into somebody. And it's usually the best rebounder of the other team. So even if he doesn't get the board, someone else is going to get it. I wrote down all of Cat's efficiency. I don't think we need all the numbers, but just a couple that I thought were interesting. He's shooting the best this year from three that he has in the last 3 years. He's shooting 44.9% from three this year, he shot 41.5% last year, 36.5% the year before, which was one of his lowest in his career. Just a really down year that first year with Gobert. But his true shooting percentage is also just bonkers this year, 66.4%, which takes into account all aspects of shooting, including free throws. So that's crazy. That's his career high right now. But he's got his lowest 3-point attempt rate since 2018 and 19 this year, despite shooting his best from three that he shot in a while. So he had his second highest 3-point attempt rate of his career and fourth highest at 3-point attempt rate of his career in the 2 years with Gobert. So if you're like our buddy Prez, who just put out a video on this on YouTube and think, hey, Cat should be shooting more threes, you might get your wish when Mitch comes back, especially if they end up playing a lot together, because then Mitch will be involved more in those possessions where, Brunson needs a hard screen up top. Someone's going to be diving to the rim. That's going to more often be Mitch then, although you'll have still the option of using Cat that way. I mean, imagine those like double screens that they've been running for Cat and Hart, but with Cat and Mitch. I mean, it just seems almost nonsensical to have two guys that are that talented at both finishing around the rim and then Cat at popping out to three. It could be a potentially really deadly combo, but I think we could potentially see Cat getting a lot more 3-point attempts up with Mitch in the lineup, which would make certain people really happy. But in the next segment, we're going to talk about how this all plays out, the odds that Mitch maybe gets traded after we've just done all this work trying to figure out how he fits. But he is also the most movable salary on this team if they want to make an upgrade this season. We'll answer the question of if he ever starts with Cat. We'll try to figure out how many minutes per game and what the rotation might look like. And the big important question, could he potentially play against the Celtics if the Knicks were able to get that far into the playoffs? So we're going to get into all that in just a moment. But first, we're going to let you know about our friends over at Skims. And sorry, I didn't have to copy up. All right, 3, 2, 1. When I found out about Skims making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family, so I just had to give it a shot. And let me tell you, it lives up to the hype. I've always had issues with underwear fit, comfort, just finding the right style for me. And Skims changed all that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I'm more of a boxer brief guy, and I used to rock with 5-inch boxer briefs, which is, your inseam, how long they run from, the seam. And I thought that was the size for me. That was what I'd always gotten in previous underwear. But when I got some Skims, I was like, oh, they have a 3-inch option, and that's still a boxer brief. It's not just a regular brief. So let me give it a shot. I actually really like them. I think it's a good cut, and my number one thing is these don't ride up at all, which was my issue with previous underwears. And the 5-inch one doesn't ride up either, but the 3-inch one, you feel like you have a lot of mobility, very comfortable all day. It's not bunching up in uncomfortable places. Definitely my favorite pair of underwear that I own is the 3-inch stretch boxer briefs from Skims. So if you want to get some for yourself, shop Skims Men's at skims.com/LockedOnNBA and Skims stores, including their flagship location on 5th Avenue in New York. If you happen to be in town, let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows.
We also wanted to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs. FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so what does it actually look like when Mitchell Robinson is back? I think this is a conversation, Alex, that will, again, probably be a full episode when he actually returns. But I wanted to do kind of the preview version of it today because it's something that I found myself thinking about quite often this season. I think I don't know if we disagree on this. I guess I'll clarify from you. Like, what do you think his role is when he first comes back? Because I said it a little earlier in the episode. I think he is going to be brought along incredibly slowly. I bet that first game, it's won 8-minute stretch, and then probably pre-All-Star break, and we can go back and check this, I would guess the number is something like 14 minutes per game, and that might even be a little bit high.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to be low to start for sure. I think that he's going to be brought back in essentially just spelling cat at the beginning, and coming in and working with that bench unit. But I think given Tibbs's sensibilities, given what we know that he values, and that he was sort of the pioneer of this new offensive rebounding style in the NBA that's sort of found a renaissance since the Knicks did it in 22-23. I would not be surprised if his end game is getting Mitch in there starting, and having him start next to Cat. I don't know what's going on in Tibbs's head, but I know that you and I have certainly been talking about, like, it looks like, OG, McHale, and Hart at different points are feeling the taxing, nature of the amount of minutes that they're playing, the amount that they're being relied on as the three, most consistent starters in this lineup. And, it seems like generally Jalen and Kat are the two guys that get the breaks. If there is going to be one, those three guys are, needed out there like all the time. I do think that Tibbs maybe would look at that and say, well, if I can find a way to make this work with Mitch starting, you still have Precious off the bench to spell either Mitch or Cat, which I think is a good, person to have out there that you can bring in for either of those two guys. And then you have, OG and probably McHale starting, and then Josh Hart to rotate in for those guys. So then you can just always have two of those guys on the court at any given time without worrying about, hey, am I overextending these guys? Oh, am I about to play them like 45 minutes for the second game of a back-to-back or whatever? Gives you a little more leeway there. And then obviously Brunson with Deuce and Campaign, if you really need him to sub in there, I think it gives you a lot of options that way. So I wonder if that would be Tibbs's end game, because otherwise you're kind of just looking at like I don't know how often you would want to have Precious and Mitch out there together. Like, I don't know if that's a lineup that you want to lean on a ton, because Precious doesn't really stretch the floor. So I think your ideal would be, rotating in and out with, bring in Josh Hart and have sort of the current starting lineup with Mitchell Robinson for a bit. Then bring Cat in if you need more shooting with the same starting lineup that we've seen. And then you can have Precious in there for both of those guys with some of the bench unit if you want to have a little different look in the, in the second half or whatever. And I think that if Tibbs can make that work, and certainly he claims to watch every single game in the NBA 3 times, so like he's probably seen like this worked really well for Minnesota last year. It let them have an awesome defense and a pretty good offense. And I think that the Knicks have more overall offensive talent, like at every position that they can throw out there, than the Wolves did last year. I think you're looking at potentially a really good starting lineup if you can make it work. It's a big if, and you got to get Mitch up to speed first and whatever. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like that might ultimately be the plan.
Yeah, I think it's situational. I think, again, if you run into the Cavs, if you run into the Sixers, very decent chance that that's your starting lineup, and maybe it doesn't close games, but maybe you open games big. And that has always been Tom Thibodeau's preference. And he went way away from his preference, making Karl-Anthony Towns the starting center this year, just because there wasn't a big worthy of starting next to him, and the trade-offs that come with that. Mitchell Robinson is that big where you can justify that and say, hey, we might be a better overall team. We might be a better overall playoff team with him on the floor. I think if you play, for example, the Celtics in a playoff series, I have a feeling it would be Towns starting, Mitchell Robinson coming off the bench and trying to just really own his minutes. I also think Tom Thibodeau is aware, with Mitch's injury history at this point, obviously some of it, like the Embiid thing, was out of his control. I think the Knicks are generally going to try to keep him to 20 or less minutes per game, even once he is fully ramped up. And because of that, he'll never have a role as substantial as Gobert's on the Timberwolves last year, even if he does start. But Alex, implicit in all this is my argument that I don't think he ultimately gets traded. It was my bold prediction at the beginning of the year that he doesn't get traded, and he ultimately starts some playoff games for the Knicks. I am sticking with that. I just don't see the wing out there that is worth the investment, or less that. I don't see the wing out there that like Mitch, you could actually get for Mitchell Robinson at this point that would substantially impact the New York Knicks? They had this question on the Hot Hand Theory pod, and I thought it was great. And they were Jonathan Macri was on. They asked him, all right, who even next offseason, who would who would the Knicks trade for that Tom Thibodeau would trust over OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, or Mikal Bridges? And you can't come up with a name, right? Like, he's ultimately going to play those guys as much as he's going to play those guys. So you might as well have the investment and the backup center position, and also just rehab Mitch's value a little bit. If he stays healthy throughout the playoffs, if he makes a big impact, if he, again, looks like one of the best defensive bigs in the NBA, like he did last time we saw him, like, you can actually get something of value for him this offseason, where right now, like, I think he is perceived at best as neutral money in a trade, at best. While some teams would ask for an asset attached to him. I know you and I don't believe that, and we think he's a really impactful player still, but I think that's realistically his value, and I don't think there's any point in trading him if that's his value.
Yeah, and the other challenging thing is that he makes a decent chunk of salary, but the Knicks, because of where they are, thanks to the new cap rules, are not able to receive more salary back at all, which means that if you're going to go get anyone of value, you probably are. This really perfect storm where you'd have to find someone who is underpaid, first off, like, and which is a challenge in and of itself, and or on a rookie deal, which teams are usually less likely to want to part from. And then on top of that, you have to probably aggregate like Precious with him or something, which at that point, like, especially if you're trading for a wing, like, I don't know what your thoughts are then on center depth. Like, if the Knicks would then think like, oh, Jericho Sims is the answer to just back up Cat from now on, which I'm not there. I don't know. I don't know if I've made that emphatically clear enough yet, like throughout the course of the show this year, but like, I definitely would not be like, let's get Sims out there more, because he's a little inconsistent. Like, just it creates really tough scenarios on offense to try to work through if he's your backup for even like 10 to 15 a game. So, I think that I think it's just a challenging scenario. I think that the Knicks are honestly just going to have to wait until next offseason. And, to your point, Mitch's value couldn't possibly be any lower right now, like coming in off injury. Like, he's got this rep of being injured all the time, even if the last one was caused by another player. I think that they just need that little like value rehab phase for Mitch this year. And I think that, trying to legitimately play him and not just like play him just to soak up minutes or whatever, but legitimately try to find the best scenario for him, see if it works. And then if it doesn't, then at least you've shown like, hey, he's still a useful player. He's just not for us going into the offseason. I think that's going to be the way to approach it the rest of the season. But Gavin, there's still so much to talk about. And honestly, we're still, again, if we have Ian Begley's timeline, we still got 2 weeks to talk about this. So we may as well leave a little bit of meat on the bone. I think we've covered a lot of bases here. But we're going to sign off for today. We'll have game recaps for you guys starting next week and cover all the games next week. But there is going to be a long lull next week. So maybe that's another opportunity to talk about some more Mitchell Robinson stuff, possibly even explore the idea of if the Knicks were to make a trade this season, who would they go for instead of Mitchell Robinson, who would potentially make a better fit or whatever. Jonas Valanciunas is a name that Ian Begley brought up. So maybe we'll do a little talk about him and talk to the various hosts of the various teams that he's been on over the last few years, because he's certainly been a world traveler. But until next time, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you all soon. Peace out, everybody.